Today, we are going to talk about the dumbest X-Men comic book fan in history. David Harth, we talked him out here on the channel. He's from CBR. He has some of the dumbest takes. They're all through a modern lens. And he definitely thinks of himself as an X-Men aficionado. But he had this article out this week talking about how X-Men are a flawed civil rights allegory. And he gets basically every single thing wrong in this, Doc. Every single thing wrong.
What do we expect for armchair philosophizing from fucking CBR? I really don't have high expectations for it, but this still somehow managed to underwhelm me.
He starts out stating the X-Men stand for something very important. Generations of people affected by racism and prejudice can look to the X-Men and see something of themselves. However, as great as it is, the X-Men are so thematically resonant. Looking at their history reveals that they were actually an incomplete civil rights allegory, especially when looking at things through a modern lens. Part of this stems from the time when the X-Men were created and how people viewed civil rights back then. The idea out of itself that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created the X-Men solely as a civil rights allegory is absolutely false. They were just a superhero team, and the civil rights stuff really didn't get in there until the early 80s and didn't become completely overtaking the franchise in continuities until the early 2000s, 40 years into the franchise.
Stan and Jack created the X-Men as they did because they were tired of coming up with origins. They both said this in interviews throughout the years. Anybody reading X-Men could relate to it. If you have ever felt like an outcast, you can relate to X-Men. This is not a difficult concept. It is a much more modern take to make it a civil rights allegory.
Absolutely. He also states, Professor Charles Xavier's dream was for mutants to live in harmony with humans, like the world envisioned in Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic I Have a Dream speech from 1963. However, Xavier didn't plan on fulfilling his dream by fighting the racist power structure that held mutants down. Rather, Xavier's X-Men were going to defend the people who hated them. They fought to keep humans safe, often from other mutants like Magneto's extremist faction, the Brotherhood of Mutants. At some point, humanity was supposed to stop hating mutants and just give them rights. To put it in the simplest terms, the X-Men were meant to serve humans in every way, except when it was their own lives and futures that were on the line.
First of all, the initial take on this, that it somehow has any relation to the I Have a Dream speech, is asinine, considering X-Men 1 came out in July of 1963. Do you know when Martin Luther King's speech was? August of 63. The speech literally happened after a month after the first issue of the comic came out. Jack and Stan came up with a great allegory that works for anybody that feels like an outsider. The idea that you can stand up and do the right thing and people will still hate you is a timeless feeling. It is a timeless experience that everyone on the planet has experienced at some point in time. The idea that it's just somehow only this one small aspect of the overall morality play. There are 4 million other experiences other than racial or civil rights that people can have that fall into that same type of morality play feel.
Absolutely. He also states, looking at the history of the X-Men, it's obvious the X-Men's approach to their struggle wasn't perfect. The X-Men fighting for humanity never stopped humans from building Sentinels and their upgraded forms. It never stopped humanity from creating anti-mutant government agencies like the Orcus Initiative. X-Men stories were always about a minority struggling against a monolithic power structure and losing horribly. At best, the X-Men got small victories. And when you listen to him talk, you can see that David Harth would rather Magneto lead the X-Men. He thinks Magneto's dream is what the X-Men should be striving for, and that's why it's a failed allegory. He doesn't understand the beautiful truth of Professor X's dream that we can all live in harmony. And even if people don't love us, if they fear us or whatever, we're still going to go out there and do the right thing.
Look, the whole point of Xavier versus Magneto is one is much more militant. Magneto's approach was always about expediency, and Xavier's was all about moral clarity. No wonder he later in this article, he'll wax philosophical about the greatness of the Krakoan era, because we've all known from the beginning that the Krakoan era is nothing but Magneto's dream with Xavier in charge. this author very clearly supports Magneto's dream. That's fine, but to try to argue Xavier's is ineffective because it doesn't achieve the goals you want on the timeline you want, that is where he falls into fucking villain territory. And I am less than surprised that the people that are supporting modern comics, they orient themselves to the villain perspective. And we wonder why there's no superheroics in our fucking superhero comics. It's because the people that support them are fucking villains.
Yeah, it's not surprising this guy's favorite era is Krakoa, but there's another era that he really supported. Grant Morrison's New X-Men was the first time the X-Men made sense. New X-Men was seemingly all about the X-Men not getting involved when they didn't need to, and instead looking out for themselves. This was what the X-Men should have been doing the whole time, looking out for mutants. This was something of a golden age for the X-Men, but it didn't last. Not long after Morrison's revolutionary X-Men run, Scarlet Witch depowered almost 99% of mutant race in House of M.
There's been far more damage done to the X-Men franchise as the result of Grant Morrison and his bad cover band version of Chris Claremont's greatest hits than what came positive out of it. It fundamentally uprooted a lot of the unspoken rules of how the X-Men worked. And one of those is that Xavier offered to cover the cost of living and give a great place to live and work and train and have access to equipment to a bunch of mutants that actually had useful powers in exchange for them being his strike force, both against evil mutants as well as the government and any other sort of threat that might show up, so that, hey, look, if you guys can accept the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, we are very similar. Grant took them entirely out of the costumed superhero business, made them narcissistic, self-absorbed ethno-nationalists before they had a nation, and then somehow managed to make it work that, yeah, we can just support every single mutant and we can just keep bringing them into the school and making it a safe haven for them. And the only thing we're going to give a shit about is mutant-related activities. That is a terrible way to gain acceptance and a great way to be viewed as the other perpetually.
Saying that's what they should be fighting for. They were fighting for the wrong thing the entire time. Wanting to be a part of society, going out there and helping people that were different than them was the wrong approach the entire time. They always should have been looking out for their own only. And that was the only way that X-Men could have worked, because this guy doesn't actually like X-Men. He likes what X-Men would be if it was created in 2020.
It is an anti-acceptance stance when the idea that separating yourselves should be the goal. You know what? Fine. Cool. Then what the fuck have we been doing for the last, 60 years since the civil rights movement, if that's where we're going to go back to under this guy's idea? He's a fucking villain and he supports the villains. And are we shocked whatsoever?
These are the final words he had on the subject. On one hand, Xavier's dream was admirable and noble. Mutants and humans living together was the goal that everyone should fight towards. However, when only one side was fighting to achieve this dream, it wasn't going to work. In the X-Men's case, neither side was fighting for an equal and just future. The X-Men merely served their oppressor. The human government then ignored all the good they did instead of meeting mutants even halfway. Humans tried to take away more rights from them. They even built better weapons to kill them, while ordinary people refused to let go of their hate and prejudice. The X-Men failed because they were fighting for the wrong people. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the X-Men were created for, what they've represented, and what their history is.
Yes, really is.
The X-Men stand for everything that this guy hates, basically, is what it is. And he doesn't like that. They should be exactly the way that he would envision them to be if they were created, in this culture from a modern lens, because we can't look at it as a creation of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and the actual 60-year history. We need to throw that out the window because they were doing it wrong all along, not realizing the point is sometimes you do have to go out there and do the right thing, even if people hate you. Sometimes you go out there and you do the right thing and people won't like you. They won't trust you just because of the way you look. There are sometimes you're going to feel like an outsider and you're going to have to live in the shadows. But that shouldn't preclude you from doing the right thing and going out there and fighting for what is just. And Absolutely. This guy doesn't get that.
No, he doesn't. He's taking the Brotherhood perspective on this, and we're not shocked that he disagrees with Xavier's vision. No shit, you're basically in support of the approach of the Brotherhood. The expediency above all else. The results, goddamn the method. That the results are the only thing that matter. That the process is irrelevant. And the whole point was doing things the right way matters. That was the lesson of the X-Men. Doing things even when it wasn't effective. That endless struggle, this allegorical universal experience that all people have of trying to do things the right way, even when it doesn't get you the end result that you want. You're still morally clear, and you have a moral imperative to do that. That is Xavier's dream. The ends justify the mean. That is the dream of Magneto and the Brotherhood.
There's a reason that it wasn't even close for a very long time. The X-Men was the best-selling comic book in the world, the hottest property out there, the comic book that everyone was reading. That is not the case now, and it hasn't been the case for a very long time, because starting basically when God Loves Man Kills Volume 2, story number 2 that Chris Claremont put in there in about 2002, 2003, basically put that this could only be an allegory for civil rights or whatever, and it stopped being something that everyone could relate to. It stopped being fun. It started being what this guy wanted all along. And guess what? People checked out because it wasn't as enjoyable as it was when everyone could relate to it.
Up until 2003, with Extreme X-Men number 25, God Loves Man Kills was out of continuity story that existed only in the Marvel graphic novel books. It was not part of existing continuity. And then they did God Loves Man Kills 2, retconned it in, and have started pigeonholing the franchise into one very, very narrow allegorical approach. And they wonder why it's flawed.
So, Doc, we talked about this for about 26 minutes, something like that. Now, when it comes out on YouTube, this is going to be like a 12 to 15-minute video. Maybe it'll be a little bit longer because this is a bigger subject or whatever. But we put this out on the Patreon on Doc Unfiltered. You also get an unfiltered review of Fire and Ice Welcome to Smallville number 4, which will also be about 12 to 15 minutes. But the actual review will probably be well over 20 minutes. And we also do a Q&A every week, which will be out on Monday on the Patreon. And what do you think? Should people go check it out? I think they should.
I think people absolutely should go check out the Patreon, go see some unfiltered content, go listen to some unfiltered content, and hear how many more times I say fuck and how many more times I call this guy retarded.
And also how much more information Doc gives that I have to cut out just for time constraints. Doc gives out way too much info every single time we talk.
Absolutely. I am nothing if I am not fucking wordy.